What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over the Squadron Supreme from the early 2000s. Now, you have to remember a couple things. Now, the first thing you have to remember that when it comes to the Squadron Supreme, they have been around since the 1960s, but they were basically a way for Marvel to answer the question, what would happen if the Justice League had fought against the Avengers? Now, of course, Marvel could not use the DC characters in their own books. And so what they did was they said, in the multiverse, there is a universe, you have a team called the Squadron Supreme. And they basically represent the different members of the Justice League. So like Hyperion is Superman, Batman, Nighthawk, Blur is Flash. Those are your characters who represent different characters on the Justice League. Now, the Squadron Supreme have been around since the 1960s, but here comes another problem and something else you have to know, which is that over the years in Marvel Comics, we have seen different versions of these characters. So different versions of Hyperion, different versions of Blur, different versions of Nighthawk. That's how it goes when it comes to the Squadron Supreme, because when it comes to the Marvel multiverse, it's a massive multiverse. And so some of those universes in the multiverse are just planets that are full of Squadron Supreme characters. And so, of course, when it comes to the main Marvel Universe Avengers, they do run into these different versions of the Squadron Supreme. Now, in the early 2000s, we had Supreme Power. And at first, it did seem like this was Marvel kind of saying, hey, listen, this is going to be the legit origin of all the characters on the Squadron Supreme. Here comes the problem, though. Once you have Marvel kind of wrap up all these different storylines that were telling the origin of the Squadron Supreme in the early 2000s, Marvel then came out and said, okay, all those characters in those books, they take place in another universe in the Marvel multiverse. But yes, they're still the Squadron Supreme, but a different version of the Squadron Supreme. Now, with that being said, Supreme Power was a Marvel Max series. It was a way for Marvel to kind of do more adult comics when it came to Marvel Max. And so the Squadron Supreme was just another title to kind of say, hey, tell this story, but you're able to do more adult themed things in these books because this is Marvel Max. Now, today's video is really going to focus on Dr. Spectrum because we're going to cover the miniseries that came out, and the miniseries that came out basically after a few issues of Supreme Power had came out. But this storyline actually takes place right in the middle of the first volume. So when I kind of rework the playlist, you're going to have volume 1 part 1, and then you're going to have this video, and then you're going to have volume 1 part 2, because basically this entire storyline takes place in the middle of volume 1 of Supreme Power. Now, when it comes to Dr. Spectrum or John Ledger or Joseph Ledger, basically, he was a military person who was brought in to help the American government test a crystal. Now, this crystal was the power source to the spaceship that had brought Hyperion to Earth. The problem was the American government had been studying this crystal and realized that it does react to how people think. And so if you're holding the crystal and it does read your thoughts, different things will happen thanks to your thoughts because you're holding the crystal. Now, they brought in Joseph Ledger because he is a character who can be able to kind of have a focused mind and possibly be able to overcome the power of the crystal. The problem was the more he used the crystal, the more he was able to unlock like different powers of the crystal, but it was also hurting him and began to bond with him permanently inside his hand, embedded inside his hand. And after that had happened, he was put in a coma. Now, in Supreme Power Volume 1, we watched the American government try to find different ways to wake him up, but of course, nothing had worked. But then at the end of volume 1, he did wake up, but he woke up different, where it seemed like he had 2 or 3 different personalities, and that right there was very concerning for the American government. And so this miniseries does kind of answer the idea of, okay, does he have multiple personalities inside his head thanks to that crystal? Or what is really going on inside his head thanks to this crystal? But on top of that, we get the origin of Joseph Ledger in this storyline. Now, as we actually dive into the storyline, we actually do pick up with Joseph Ledger. Now, this actually takes place after the crystal was embedded inside his hand, but then he fell into a coma. And so right now, we actually pick up with Ledger, but inside his own head. And right now, all he sees is complete darkness, but he also hears music. Now, he doesn't really focus on the music. He's more concerned on where in the world is he. Now, he does see this light, and he wonders what in the world is going on with this light. But either way, he's trying to find a way out of this darkness that he's surrounded in, but he doesn't realize that right now he's inside his own head, and he's about to go on one heck of a mind trip thanks to the crystal being bonded to him. Now, to go ahead and kind of start off his mind trip, he basically wakes up in a memory. Now, of course, this is a memory or a moment in his life where he already kind of went through, but basically it was him in his early days in the military on a particular military mission where him and his group is going after another particular group, a group of enemies. Now, with that being said, once he realized where he's at, he realized that he's right now reliving something that he already lived, he already experienced, he already went through, and he knows how this entire thing is going to go through. And so he's right now kind of freaking out, but then he's kind of like, okay, maybe this is life giving me a second chance to kind of fix mistakes that happened in my past, like this one on this particular mission when one of his men actually end up getting shot and dies. And so it's him thinking, maybe I can save this guy this time by telling him what to do in advance so that he will not get shot in the head and die. The problem is, though, as he goes ahead and relives this memory and experience everything he already did in the past, that one guy that he did warn and try to protect and try to help out to save his life because he thinks this is God or whoever giving him a second chance in life, that guy still dies. And he's kind of like, what in the world? I had the chance to relive this memory, to hopefully fix things, to make things better, and that guy still died. What in the world is going on? As soon as he leaves that memory, he does continue his mind trip and he goes into another memory. Now, this one takes place way in the past when he is a young boy. But when he walks into the room and he realized what is about to happen, he now realized this is something else he had already lived through. And of course, it's the moment he goes and talks to his mother in the past. And this is the moment we learned that when it came to him and his mother, his father, her husband, has left them behind, but she got remarried to another guy. Now, of course, this new guy is very abusive to Joseph Ledger and also her, but she's okay with that because this man had took her and her son in, gave them a place to live, food to eat, and basically said because he's out here taking care of us, he can do whatever he wants to do to us. And so when you have a young Joseph Ledger telling his mom that he does not like his stepdad, she slaps him in the face and says, you have to like him because look at what he did for us. Even though he's abusing Joseph Ledger, it's her telling her son to ignore it so that they can still have the nice thing they have because of him. Now, out in the real world, we actually do pick up with some characters we actually met in the earlier videos we actually did, but also some other characters who are going to be important for this storyline only. So of course you do have the general, the one who kind of brought in Joseph Ledger to basically work on this military project with the crystal. You also have Bill Steeman, who is one of the scientists we actually saw in our last couple videos, who's going to be very important when it comes to Supreme Power and other books we're going to do for the Squadron Supreme. But there is a new character, and his new character is Dr. Norton. Now, Dr. Norton is going to be one of those characters where, like, he's just doing too much, but at the same time, he cares for his patients. And so that's why he's doing too much to basically help out his patients, because he's been brought in to kind of watch over Joseph Ledger until the military is actually able to kind of remove the crystal out of his hand, out of Joseph Ledger's hand. Now, you do have basically our doctor here kind of go against the general when it comes to classified information, because you do have the general tell Dr. Norton, if you want information, unfortunately, we can't give it to you because it's classified. But for Dr. Norton, he's kind of like, if you want me to help this guy out, you basically are going to have to unclassify any kind of information, because right now, any information you're withholding could possibly help me save this guy's life. Now, while you do have the characters talking to one another, you do have one of the paramedics thinking about actually trying to remove the crystal from the hand of Joseph Ledger, the same crystal that has been embedded inside the hand of Joseph Ledger. Now, of course, that was a huge mistake, because as soon as that paramedic touches the crystal, there was some kind of reaction where basically you do have this explosion. Now, how this explosion works is very unique, because what happens is that you had everybody else who did not touch the crystal get blown back. But of course, they survived. But the paramedic who actually touched the crystal, he died. He was actually turned to stone. And that right there is very huge, because that guy, he's dead now. He turns to stone and then turns to dust, and he's gone. But the area surrounding him and Joseph Ledger, that entire area, or the ground, has been wiped out, but the people have been pushed back and they survived. But this shows the general, it shows Dr. Steeman, it shows Dr. Norton, what in the world is going on with that crystal and Joseph Ledger, and how important this mission actually is to get that crystal out of the hand of Joseph Ledger, because that is a powerful weapon that the military could basically use to fight against their different enemies. Now, that is the moment where we actually jump back inside the head of Joseph Ledger. Now, when we actually do that, we actually do see Joseph Ledger right now back in that dark room again where we saw earlier in this video. But this time he's tied down to a chair. Now, he is confronted by another personality, another person who's right now inside his head. And this is going to begin the process of us learning what in the world is going on inside the head of Joseph Ledger. Because remember, in our last video, part 2 of volume 1, we saw that Joseph Ledger acted completely different in one moment to another, where it does seem like basically he does have multiple personalities. At the end of that video, you had the doctor say, hey, I think this dude has another personality, but that other one came from the crystal. And so right now, this is the book that's going to kind of give us that answer. Is the crystal adding onto the mind of Joseph Ledger? Meaning that, are there two different people inside the head of Joseph Ledger? And right now, is one of those people actually the crystal? Either way, you do have this other personality tell Joseph Ledger, listen, I'm either going to break you or help you. You're either going to die or live through this process. Either way, though, I'm here to learn more about you as you are here to learn more about me. But at the same time, I need to learn more about you rather than you learning about me, because you're going to help me with my mission. But at the end of this, you're going to wish that I had killed you, because this process is going to be very brutal. but then we actually pick back up in the real world. Now, when we do that, we actually pick up with Dr. Norton and a paramedic beginning the process of taking Joseph Ledger away on an ambulance. Now, while they're doing that, you have Dr. Norton kind of give us the reason on why he's going to care so much for Joseph Ledger, because Joseph looks just like his son Harry, a son that had died. And so with that, it's Dr. Norton saying, I'm going to make sure that this young man right here gets the chance to actually live, to see a bright future, because my son did not get that chance. And I feel like a young man like this guy right here should have the chance to have a good, bright future. And so this is going to be a very dedicated doctor who is trying to save the life of Joseph Ledger. Now, as we jump into the second chapter, we actually do pick up with the general and also Dr. Steeman and Dr. Norton as well, but Norton is with Joseph Ledger. But either way, you do have a conversation happening between Dr. Steeman and also the general. And this conversation is really more the idea of what can they do with Joseph Ledger? Like right now, they're actually trying to think, what can they do to get the crystal away from him? Because when it comes to the second chapter, it has been 4 months since the end of the last chapter, the first issue in this storyline. And so with 4 months passing by, they're kind of like, we have run out of different ideas that could help us get the crystal away from Joseph Ledger. But now it comes down to one particular option: cut off the hand of Joseph Ledger. If we do that right there, then bam, we get our crystal back and we're green light to continue our project to turn that crystal into a powerful weapon. But of course, they don't want to do that. Like right now, that's a last resort. And of course, if they're going to do that, they need to get the green light from the higher ups to actually do that. But while they wait for the green light, you do have Dr. Steeman say, hey, how about this? Let's bring in Hyperion, because remember, the crystal that is embedded inside the hand of Joseph Ledger, it came from Hyperion's spaceship. It what powered Hyperion's spaceship. And so they're wondering if they're able to scan the brain waves of Hyperion, maybe they can unlock a different method that could actually help them get the crystal away from Joseph Ledger. But of course, it comes down to Hyperion. On top of that, they have to do this in a very secret way. And the reason why, because even though Dr. Norton, the doctor who really cares for Joseph Ledger, got all the classified information, or he believed he got all the classified information, there was one particular information left out. And of course, that was Hyperion being an alien, not from Earth, but from space. And so with that, it's kind of like we have to do this very secretive, because if Dr. Norton finds out, it could lead into more problems. Now, getting back over to Dr. Norton, you do have Dr. Norton actually talk to Joseph Ledger, even though he's in a coma right now. Now, this is Dr. Norton kind of telling us what actually has been said a lot when it comes to doctors and patients in comas, where basically it's really good idea to talk to patients even though they're in a coma, because it could help them to actually fight against the coma and get out of the coma. Now, with that being said, while you have Dr. Norton actually talk to Joseph Ledger as a way to kind of help him get through this coma process, well, that is the moment he's confronted by a nurse. Now, this nurse is actually going to be somewhat important for this storyline, but I'm not going to sit down here and say what her name is, because honestly, I forgot her name. But either way, she's going to be somewhat important for this storyline, but not that important where it's kind of like we have to know her name because of future books down the road. But either way, she does take over for Dr. Norton at night, and so he does leave while she does the doctor stuff for Joseph Ledger at night. Now, getting back inside the head of Joseph Ledger, we actually do pick up with him right now talking to this other persona, where we can basically say it is the crystal right now talking to him. But while you have the crystal actually talking to Joseph Ledger, this is the moment where you kind of have the crystal say like, he was here, or he was brought here to Earth alongside with Hyperion for some kind of mission. Now, the problem is, though, this mission is not told to us when it comes to Joseph Ledger asking, okay, what is the mission and what's so special about this mission, and why are you so, crazy about making sure that you actually accomplish this mission. But of course, you do have the crystal not tell Joseph Ledger about the mission at all, but instead you have the crystal kind of trying to play mind games with Joseph Ledger by telling Joseph, hey, I chose you. So don't think that basically you picked up the crystal just by pure luck and here we are. No, I've been watching you. I chose you. And now we're stuck together. Now, Joseph knows the crystal is just BSing right now. But either way, it's still the crystal trying to break down the barriers around Joseph Ledger's mind and memories. And so with that, you do have the crystal kind of begin the process of diving into the mind of Joseph Ledger once again to kind of give us a better idea of the origin of Joseph Ledger. Now, with that being said, we already kind of found out that his stepfather was an abusive person. And matter of fact, this is kind of shown to us in this book right here when you do have Joseph Ledger trying to run away from home. Now, when he does try to run away from home, he is confronted by his stepfather, where you do have his stepfather he does begin the process of actually abusing Joseph Ledger. But then a second memory is also unlocked. And with this memory, we kind of learn that Joseph Ledger was also bullied at school. So no matter where he went to, he did not have anybody that he could actually turn to and actually talk to growing up. Because at home, his mom did not care for him because she wanted a good life with her new man. His stepdad continued to abuse him. And at school, he was basically bullied left and right. And so Joseph Ledger had a hard upbringing when it came to him just trying to have a normal life. But back in the real world, we actually do pick up with that nurse again. But right now, she's playing a game of poker with another nurse, but also with a security guard. Now, these two other characters are going to be somewhat important, but not majorly important for the entire storyline, where basically the night nurse, the female, she is banging the other nurse, and she's married. So either way, she is cheating right now. But of course, her husband has no idea about her night fun. Now, on top of that, this security guard is going to be also important because he's working with somebody else and they have a very secret mission when it comes to Joseph Ledger. And at first, it kind of makes it seem like this security guard could possibly be working for the general or somebody in the military. Now, that is the moment we do see that a couple of days do pass by. And when they do, we actually pick up right now with Dr. Steedman and his team beginning the process of trying to read the brainwaves of Hyperion. And the reason why, because remember, Hyperion and the crystal that is embedded inside the hand of Joseph Ledger, they have a connection. And so this is Dr. Steedman kind of telling us that he's hoping that the brainwaves will help them find a way to remove the crystal out of the hand of Joseph Ledger. Now, with that being said, though, this actually leads into what could possibly come down the road in future books that we're going to cover. And what I mean by that is, as soon as you have Dr. Steedman turn on the machine to kind of read the brainwaves of Hyperion, well, with the connection Hyperion has with the crystal inside the head of Joseph Ledger, and of course being so connected with the crystal, that Joseph Ledger does see a glimpse of something. A glimpse of the mission that Hyperion and the crystal were basically sent on when they came to Earth. And of course, in this small glimpse, it showed that Hyperion could possibly was sent here to Earth to wipe out the Earth, which does make sense because how powerful he actually is. But of course, that small glimpse was taken away. And so now you have the crystal say, I have to make sure you forget what you saw. Because if you remember, this could basically ruin my mission, and I cannot have that. And so my goal now is to make sure you do forget. Now, when we dive into the third chapter, we actually do pick up with Dr. Norton. Now, you do have Dr. Norton right now finding out a procedure is about to be done on Joseph Ledger. Now, this procedure is the same one where you have the general and also Dr. Steeman say that basically if they want to get the crystal back from Joseph Ledger, they're going to have to cut off his hand. And so, of course, this is now Dr. Norton finding out that basically the general and also Dr. Steeman have went behind his back, and they're going to greenlight procedure to cut off the hand of Joseph Ledger, something that Dr. Norton does not agree with. Now, we actually do jump back into the mind of Joseph Ledger. Now, when we actually do that, we actually do pick up with Joseph Ledger right now, basically reliving another memory. And of course, this is the one where we do actually see him joining the army. Now, with him joining the army, it is one of the best moments of his life. It's something that he actually wanted to do. But then he is confronted by the crystal once again. And of course, this is the crystal saying like, listen, man, there's nowhere you can hide in your own head because I'm part of you now. So even though you try to hide inside your own mind, don't worry, I'm going to find you. And when I do find you, basically, I'm going to continue what I've been doing to you this entire time. So do not try to hide from me because I will always find you. But then we jump back over to Dr. Norton. Now, this is Dr. Norton actually going to confront the general, because right now you have Dr. Norton actually getting very upset that he was not even talked to about the idea of cutting off the hand of Joseph Ledger, because he feels like being the doctor of Joseph Ledger, that he should know almost any kind of procedure that will be done on his patient. But of course, this is the general kind of like, I don't think you know who you're talking to. Like, basically, I'm the general. I'm the one in charge of everything here. I'm the one to make sure that everything runs correctly. So when you come at me with this attitude and thinking that you're higher than me, stronger than me, and basically control me, I need to remind you your placement in the actual system that we're actually in at the moment. Now, after you have the two characters kind of talk to one another, it does lead into the idea of Dr. Norton realizing that, okay, maybe he did overreact, but at the same time, he still wants to make sure his patient is okay. But then you have the general tell Dr. Norton, fine, I'll give you a little bit more time to basically find a way to get the crystal removed from the hand of Joseph Ledger before we do it our way. But the only reason why I'm doing this is because to kind of do it as a memory for your son. Because remember, when it comes to Dr. Norton, he lost his son. His son died a long time ago. And so he's kind of like, I'm doing this to protect my, well, not protect, but to protect my patient, Joseph Ledger. Now, we actually do jump back in the past once again. And of course, we jump back in the head of Joseph Ledger to kind of relive this memory. But basically right now, you do have this memory kind of telling us that Joseph Ledger had a girlfriend in high school, and that girlfriend was a girl known as Mandy. Now, Mandy is another character who is going to be somewhat important for this storyline. Now, with that being said, though, you do have Joseph Ledger telling his girlfriend at this moment in time that he was going to go join the army. Actually, he did join the army. Now, this was huge for him because with him always being bullied, with him always being abused by his stepfather and his mother, where basically he was kind of like, this is my chance to finally leave this town and finally get away from all this mess. Now, he was also hoping that Mandy would come with him, like basically they get married and she'll live somewhere on a military base and they can be together. But that is something that she does not want to go through. And honestly, she feels like it's him being selfish to even ask her to do something like that. But of course, after they talk for a brief moment, he does promise her that he'll come back. And when he does come back, they can actually be together. Now, here comes the problem with that though. He promised her that he will come back. But with this being in the past, we know that he never did come back for her. And so with that, you kind of have the crystal right now pretending to be another persona saying, oh, look, another memory I can use against you to basically break you. You try to hide this from me, but it didn't work out. So now I know more about you. And with me knowing more about you, I can use this actually against you now. But right after that one particular memory, we get the chance to actually jump into another memory. And when we do, we actually pick up in the early days of Joseph Ledger in the military. Now remember, in the last memory, this was Joseph Ledger in that memory thinking that going into the military was going to be something great, something beautiful. He was going to be able to get away from everybody who was basically causing him problems in his hometown. Now, with that being said, when he does arrive to boot camp, he comes to realize that the military is not going to be something easy. It's not going to be something you just jump right into and everything is going to be a-okay. That basically right now, with him going to the military and going through boot camp, he's going to have somebody else constantly yelling at him, kind of like how his stepfather did, kind of like how the bullies at his school did. It's him realizing that this is not going to be something so easy. But while you have Joseph Ledger kind of reliving this memory, well, that is the moment, a brief moment, we do see another memory. Now, when we see this brief memory, we do see a kid freaking out and this kid is holding a gun and that kid does shoot the gun. Now again, it's a brief moment, but it's just long enough to see that apparently something about that memory really does affect Joseph Ledger. On top of that, the crystal, who's right now the other persona inside the head of Joseph Ledger, also realized that there's something special, not special, but something important about that memory of that kid that Joseph Ledger is trying to lock away from the crystal, but also us as the readers as well. Now, that is the moment where we actually pick up with Dr. Norton again. Now, you do have Dr. Norton right now going back to the facility where they're basically holding Joseph Ledger at. Now, this is just Dr. Norton really just going there to kind of make sure that his patient is actually a-okay. Now, while you have Dr. Norton walking into the facility, we also get a glimpse of the nurse, the night nurse, also cheating again. This is a way to kind of remind us that basically she is a cheater and her cheating ways is going to come out very soon in this storyline for a particular reason. But either way, though, you do have Dr. Norton walk into the facility. Now, when he does walk up to our security guard we saw earlier. And when he does that, you do have security guard kind of talk to him, but not really. But then you have Dr. Norton look at a computer screen. Now, with this computer screen, it does tell Dr. Norton that right now, Joseph Ledger is not inside his room. And the question is, though, where is Joseph Ledger? Well, we kind of find out that basically the general and also Dr. Steedman had took Joseph Ledger to go ahead and proceed with the idea of cutting off the hand of Joseph Ledger as a way to get their crystal back. And so you do have Dr. Norton kind of trying to stop the general and also Steedman from actually being able to accomplish this goal. But the problem is, though, the procedure had already started. And this is actually going to be very huge because we saw earlier when somebody touches the crystal does react in a way where it does kill off things in its surrounding. And so what's going to happen now when somebody takes a weapon to it? Well, it's the same thing all over again. Because as soon as that drill does touch the crystal, you then have a huge explosion. And with this huge explosion, you basically have a huge amount of death. A lot of people died in that room because thanks to the crystal just reacting to the drill. And so everything surrounding the crystal in a certain amount of inches or feet, whatever, was killed off just like that. Now, getting into the 4th chapter, we basically continue with the idea of following Joseph Ledger. And when we do, we're back inside his head once again, where we do see him kind of reliving different kinds of memories. Now, at first, it's him kind of accessing a long hallway, and each door in this hallway does basically access a different memory. But either way, we don't see most of those memories, but we actually do pick up with him right now back in the, I forgot what they call the room where you have multiple beds in one particular room in the military, but he's in that one particular room. And right now, he's just laying there trying to think of a girl's last name, but then he hears a door knock. And when he goes to open the door, once again, we see that same kid from earlier, a small glimpse of that memory involving that kid. Right now, that kid is reappearing in this memory. It's continuing to play with the mind of Joseph Ledger. And he begins to freak out because he knows this kid. And something about this kid had basically set something off in Joseph Ledger's past. But then we actually pick up with the night nurse. Now, the reason why we actually pick up with the night nurse this time is because right now it's her basically being caught as a cheater. Because while she's on her way home or possibly on her way to work, she is confronted by a construction crew. But this is not your usual construction crew, because honestly, this is just a bunch of men who are working for a particular group, but they are going to blackmail her to have her help them complete some kind of mission. And they say, you're going to help us out. If you don't, we're going to show these photos to your husband and your kids to show that mommy and wifey here is a cheater. And of course, you do have her agree to basically help this group out. Now, we actually do access another memory of Joseph Ledger. Now, this is back into, like, I want to say not his early days in the military, but later on where, of course, he's the leader of a squad of military men. And right now they're torturing some guy to gather information. Now, the original time that Joseph Ledger had lived this memory, he was down to kind of torturing this guy. But now this is Joseph Ledger kind of reliving this memory and realizing what happens in this memory, but also kind of realizing that it's the crystal trying to access a certain memory, that memory with the kid. Because if the crystal is actually able to access that memory, then the crystal will be able to actually break Joseph Ledger down. And so right now you have Joseph Ledger kind of reliving this memory as you have him and his crew torturing this man. But then there's a knock on the door. And when you have Joseph Ledger open the door up, he's confronted by the same kid again, but this time the kid has a gun. But then we actually pick up with Penny, and Penny is the night nurse. And right now we actually do see her going over to work. Now, when she does arrive to the office, she does go straight to the office of Dr. Norton. Now, when she walks in, Dr. Norton is trying to look for a particular file, something that he had misplaced. Now, this is not Penny trying to be that good co-worker or that good employee for Dr. Norton, because remember, she was just blackmailed to basically help out a different group of people who want something to do with Joseph Ledger. And so right now, even though she's in this room talking to Dr. Norton and actually helping him to find some kind of file that he had misplaced, it's also her gathering intel for this particular group that is blackmailing her. Now, on top of that right there, we do see Dr. Norton beginning to grab his heart. And that right there is going to be very important for the second half of this story. Now, we actually do pick back up with Joseph Ledger. Now, when we do, we actually do see that Joseph Ledger is continuing his mind trip. And what I mean by that is he's reliving another memory. Now, the one he's reliving right now is going to kind of help us get a better understanding on what in the world is going on with that kid that just keeps popping up left and right. Because as you have Joseph Ledger reliving this memory, we do pick up with him right now, still the leader of this military group going on a particular military mission. But while going through the jungle, they do see that a lady is being assaulted by a group of men. And so you do have Joseph Ledger and his crew step in to basically stop these men from assaulting this woman. And so you do have Joseph Ledger and his men basically work together to kind of save the lady from being assaulted by these group of men. The problem is, though, in the whole mix-up going on between all the different sides, you do have shots fired. And when it's shots fired, of course, the lady ends up dead. And the men who were assaulting her, they also end up dead. But here comes the big problem, though. After the woman was killed off, and after the men who had basically assaulted her had been killed off, well, we kind of find out she had a kid. And that kid was there, and the kid was basically watched what happened to his mother. And so now you have a kid just crying and realizing that his mom is now dead. But then we get back over to Penny. Now remember, Penny just got blackmailed, and Penny's helping out a particular group gather intel on Joseph Ledger. But either way, you do have Penny walk by a security guard to confirm that this security guard is also working for this particular group. Either way, you do have Penny walk into the office of Dr. Norton to kind of find out that basically he had a heart attack. And so now she's freaking out and calling for help. But getting back over to Joseph Ledger, this actually does lead into us finding out what is so important about this kid that apparently keeps popping up left and right throughout this video, where we kind of find out that after you had Joseph Ledger and his crew take out the group of men who were going to assault that woman, well, the kid did pick up a gun, and you had Joseph Ledger being able to grab his gun and shoot the kid by killing the kid off. Now, when he did that, of course, you had the rest of the military group kind of think like, okay, good job, boss. You saved my life from being killed from that kid. That's great. That's amazing. But for Joseph Ledger, that's not great. That's not good at all. And really, you do have some of the people in this group actually think that Joseph Ledger is just like them. And you have Joseph say, no, I'm not like you. Like, yes, I did kill that kid, but I'm not like you. As you guys are standing here right now enjoying the idea of me shooting a kid and basically killing that kid to save your life or save my life, y'all think it was a great thing. But you have to realize we just ended a kid's life. This kid did not have a chance to have a better future. His mom died, and then later on, he died. I am not like you at all. But the reason why this is so important because you do have Joseph Ledger assault the military guy who's part of his group, who's kind of celebrating the idea that Joseph Ledger had killed that kid. But that's all the crystal needed, because now the crystal realized, okay, now I fully understand you. Now I could possibly break you, because now I realize what is so special about that kid. What was so important about that kid popping up left and right throughout your memory. But to end the fourth chapter, we kind of find out that after Joseph Ledger had he did assault the guy in a way, but you do have Joseph Ledger go back home, his actual house where his mom and his stepdad was at. But when he gets home, there's a bunch of police cars and ambulance. And of course, you kind of find out that Joseph Ledger's mother had died. And that right there is very huge. Now, getting into the fifth chapter, we basically do pick up with Dr. Norton. Now, this is us finding out that Dr. Norton did survive his heart attack. And with him being able to survive his heart attack, you do have Dr. Norton basically say, I'm leaving this hospital because I have to go check up on my patient. This is your usual old man who's very stubborn and kind of like, listen, I got things to do. I don't have time to sit here in this hospital. Now, as he leaves, he does go check up on Joseph Ledger. But this is also Dr. Norton telling Joseph, listen, I may be an old man, but I'm an old man with old tricks up my sleeves. And so I'll be able to actually help you out. You just have to hang in there, Joseph. Just give me a few more minutes. It's him saying that I'm not going to let the general just turn you into some kind of test subject, turn you into some kind of just project, that basically you are a human being and you have rights and you need to be treated like a human being. But either way, though, after that, you didn't have Dr. Norton go confront the general. Now, this is Dr. Norton telling the general, you're going to have to let me in. You're going to have to stop trying to BS me around, trying to put me somewhere where I can't basically help my patient out. And so with you trying to do this to me, I'm going to tell you right now, if you try to prevent me from actually helping my patient because you're worried about that crystal, I will go to the Senate. And let me tell you right now, if I do go to the Senate, it's going to be an actual problem for you. Because this is Dr. Norton telling us, but also reminding the general, you have not been actually talking to the Senate and telling them every single secret you have, like Hyperion or Nighthawk, because this is basically the book telling us that the general does know about Nighthawk and possibly knows about other heroes across the world right now in this universe. And so it's Dr. Norton saying, you're going to let me help my patient, or the Senate is going to know all your dark secrets. And when they do, oh, you're going to be in big time trouble. And so you didn't have the general actually take a step back and realize that he should go ahead and let Dr. Norton try to save the life of Joseph Ledger. Now, we actually do pick up with Penny, the night nurse. And right now you have Penny basically going to the office of Dr. Norton while he's away. Now, the reason why she's in his office right now is because she's looking for his journal. Now, of course, she's doing this because she's working for this organization that's right now blackmailing her. The problem is, though, when she goes into his office, the journal is gone. And with the journal being gone, it's kind of like, dang, now what can she do? Because now she has no way of kind of helping herself out of this situation she's in right now, because they ask her to go get the journal out of his desk in his office. But now the journal is missing. And so now she has to do something else if she wants to get out of this blackmailing system that basically she's part of right now. But then we actually pick up with a security guard. Now remember, this security guard is working for some other organization that has plans for Joseph Ledger. It's just that we have no idea what that plan could possibly be. But either way, right now, you do have the security guard getting a call, and they're basically telling him, hey, we're going to be there soon, so you better be ready. And he tells them, I'll be ready, but you better have my money. And of course, that means something's going to pop off very soon. But then we actually pick up with Dr. Norton. Now, when we actually do pick up with Dr. Norton, we actually do see him right now meeting up with Mandy. Now, this is actually very important. And the reason why, because you have to remember, Mandy is the ex-girlfriend of Joseph Ledger, the girl he was dating before he left for the army, the one that he was hoping that basically she'll go with him to the military base, they get married and live a great life. Because remember, growing up, Joseph Ledger had nobody. His mom, his stepdad, his bullies at school, they were all abusing him. But when it came to her, it was kind of like this bright thing in his life, and he was actually hoping that maybe she'll go with them, they'll get married and continue the great thing they have. But of course, she said no, because to her, it was kind of selfish of him to basically ask her to give up her life to go with him somewhere that she does not want to go to. But either way, this is kind of Dr. Norton trying to get a better idea of Joseph Ledger, because this is the only person who may know something important about Joseph Ledger. And so you do have Mandy tell Dr. Norton, okay, I'll tell you everything I know, but I want to tell you one thing. I was not the one who killed this particular person or who did the murders, meaning that there's more than one. Two people died. And she's saying that she did not kill anybody. And you kind of have to wonder, wait a second, where is this coming from? But it's a way for Dr. Norton and us to kind of get a better understanding of what Joseph Ledger is actually like. Now, back at the facility where Joseph Ledger is basically being held at, we actually do pick up right now with the security guard right now getting ready to help out this hidden organization pull off their master plan, which is to kidnap Joseph Ledger. Because while you have security guard let these two guys in who are going to proceed in kidnapping Joseph Ledger, you do have this other kind of military guard wondering what in the world is going on. But before he's able to kind of question them and figure out what's going on, he's shot in the head and now he's dead. And so it's kind of like, okay, things are popping off and these two random guys are about to kidnap Joseph Ledger while every other key character is away at the moment. But then we actually pick back up with Mandy and also Dr. Norton. Now, this is Mandy trying to tell us that she's going to explain what she meant earlier when two people had died and the death of these two people that were killed off that kind of changed who Joseph Ledger basically was. And honestly, it was three people, but the first person kicks off the idea of what this story is going to lead into, the other two deaths. And what I mean by that is you have Mandy say that when Joseph Ledger came home one time from the military, he found out that his mother was killed off. Now, even though his mother was an abusive woman and did a lot of horrible things to him, he still cared for his mother. But to come home to find out that she has been killed off is kind of like, what happened here? Now, the first person you have Joseph Ledger think about is, of course, his stepfather, because his stepfather was just not abusive to him, but also abusive to his own mother. And so you have Joseph saying, okay, it had to be my stepfather. He's the one who had killed her. The problem is, though, his stepfather left his mom months ago before she died. And so it's kind of weird on why would he kill her off if he left her behind. And you have the stepfather say, I left her because she went back to her old ways, which was sex work. She was out there being a prostitute. And so with her out there doing all those things, it basically told the stepfather that he should step away because it was something that he did not agree on. It was something he did not like to see his lady actually doing. And so with that being said, he tells Joseph Ledger, your mom went back to her old ways. And that's why I left her. But I didn't kill her. And matter of fact, if you want to find out who killed her, look in her ledger because she kept names of every single person that she basically took care of in her line of work. And look at the very last name because that very person, that last person in her ledger is probably the one who had killed her. Now, Joseph Ledger still kills off his stepfather for all the pain he caused in the past, but also being a jerk right now in the current time about who killed off Joseph Ledger's mom. But yeah, he killed his stepfather. Now, Mandy was there and Mandy tried to stop Joseph Ledger, but of course she couldn't stop him because he was a man on a mission to figure out who killed his mother. But getting back over to the kidnapping of Joseph Ledger, we actually do pick up with those two men being able to get the body of Joseph Ledger and they're about to leave with his body. Now, you do have security guard kind of like, hey, where's my payment? Because I helped you guys get inside this building to get that body. So I deserve to get paid. And so you do have these two guys give him his payment. A shot in the head. He's dead now. Just like that. But now the body of Joseph Ledger has been kidnapped. But getting back over to the story of Joseph Ledger trying to figure out who had basically killed his mother off, he did find her ledger. And when he went through the ledger, he was able to figure out who it was. It was her last client, and his last client's name is not actually important. Just know that Joseph Ledger found that guy and shot him in the head and killed him right there in the middle of the park while this man was with his family. So this man basically was cheating on his wife with a sex worker and everything. And so you had Joseph Ledger kill off this guy because, well, this guy killed his mom. Now, after that, you do have Mandy say that even though he went out of his way and killed 2 people in cold blood, the American government plus the military was able to sweep what he did under the rug, meaning that technically he is a clean man. He did nothing wrong. Everything he did, all the evidence that showed that he was the murderer disappeared just like that. He was a clean and clear man. The problem was that Mandy said as soon as the military did that for him, they reprogrammed him like he was some kind of machine. They rewired him to make him do anything they want him to do and sent him out on missions that were dangerous. But of course, he was the perfect guy to complete those missions. Now, at the end of this chapter right here, not this chapter, but this section, you do have this child walk out. And when this child actually walk out, we kind of find out that this is a son of Joseph Ledger, that Mandy got pregnant by Joseph Ledger, but she never told him, you have a son. And that right there is very huge. But getting back over to Joseph Ledger, we do kind of find out that basically he has been kidnapped. Like he's been put on a van and they're driving away with him. And so whoever these guys are, they were able to grab him and get out of there before something could possibly stop them from completing their mission. Now, as we get into the final chapter, we actually pick up with those guys trying to get away with the body of Joseph Ledger. Now, of course, this does lead into a chase where you do have the military trying to chase them down. Now, at first, you have the military trying their best to stop these guys without actually harming the truck because they're scared of actually harming Joseph Ledger, even though he does have that crystal, which the crystal does react in a way where it's actually trying to protect Joseph Ledger. Either way, though, you do have them being chased down. Now, the military backs off, and when they do back off, you have these guys wonder, okay, did we actually win? Did we actually get away? And now we have the body of Joseph Ledger. But the military called in Hyperion. And so, of course, Hyperion was able to stop them so easily. And so Joseph Ledger was basically handed back over to the military. But then we actually pick up with the general and also Dr. Steedman. Now, this is a very important conversation. And the reason why, because it's now the general and also Dr. Steedman trying to figure out what in the world is going on here. Like, who was this other group that was trying to kidnap Joseph Ledger? On top of that, how in the world were they able to pull this off? Now, I do know that the night nurse was basically involved in this whole process of Joseph Ledger being kidnapped. But again, though, there had to be some other pieces. Now, you do have Dr. Steedman tell the general, okay, I do have some news for you. And this is going to be some kind of shocking information because Hyperion did save Joseph Ledger, but you did have the general wondering, did Hyperion see Joseph Ledger or the crystal? Now, luckily, Hyperion did not see the crystal nor Ledger, but this is the moment you do have Dr. Steedman tell us and also the general when Hyperion had caught that truck, the truck that was holding Joseph Ledger, Hyperion powers kind of disappeared. Not completely, but partially. Like he felt weaker. Like he couldn't hold the truck like he did earlier in the video for a brief second. But luckily, that brief second went away and he was able to regain his powers, to regain his strength to hold that truck. But this is also Dr. Steedman and the general possibly thinking that, yes, there is some kind of connection with the crystal, but also with Hyperion as well. But with the crystal being nearby Hyperion, it did something to his powers, but also his memories. But this leads into what we saw in our last video, which actually takes place after this video. But remember, what really helped Joseph Ledger to wake up was they put Joseph Ledger nearby the spaceship that brought Hyperion to Earth. Because remember, the crystal that is embedded in the hand of Joseph Ledger was the power source to Hyperion's ship that brought him here to Earth. And so right now, it's really more of Steven saying, what if we just put the spaceship near Joseph Ledger and see what happens? And of course, we know what's going to happen. Joseph Ledger is going to wake up as soon as they do that. But then we get back over to Joseph Ledger and back in his mind right now, talking to the crystal. Now, this is the crystal and Joseph Ledger coming together as one. And what I mean by that is really more of them making a deal, because this is the crystal trying to have Joseph Ledger realize in a way that he's basically alone. Now for Joseph Ledger, he feels like he's not alone, because even though he lost Mandy, his mom, his stepfather, all those people, the military took him in. But you have the crystal say, no, the military realize that they can use you. They can control you and make you do anything they want you to do because how good you are as a killer. Even though after you kill those two guys, your stepfather and your mother's killer, they still realize they could control you because you love the military so much, because you looked at the military as a way of this great escape from your past. But in reality, it wasn't. It was just something else in your life that was just ruining your life. And so here I am trying to complete you, to make you better. But for me to do that, I have to ask you a question. Do you want to keep all the memories of all the bad things that happened to you in the past in that head of yours? Now, at first, you have Joseph say yes, but then he realized, no, he'll probably be better off if he does forget about those different things. And so this is the crystal and Joseph Ledger making a deal together to become one and become something powerful, something that could possibly rival against Hyperion. Now, to kind of wrap up this video, while you have Joseph Ledger and also the crystal making a deal, making a pact, whatever, in the real world, you do have Steedman, the general, and the military beginning the process of actually putting a spaceship that brought Hyperion here to Earth next to Joseph Ledger, hoping that something could happen that will basically unlock something great for him, possibly a great future, a great abilities, whatever, as long as he wakes out of that coma. But either way, though, while you have the military begin the process of doing that, in the head of Joseph Ledger, him and the crystal are making a deal. But at the same time, it's the crystal saying, this is what I want to show you. This is my mission. My mission is to wreck this earth, wreck this planet, to clear it out completely, to begin a new world. And I feel like you and I together, we can lead the world into the new world. But you have to accept me. You have to accept the mission. You have to accept the fact that I'm going to complete all the areas that you could not complete in yourself. I'm going to make you whole. But for that to happen, we have to work together. And so as soon as the military puts the spaceship right next to Joseph Ledger in the real world, and as soon as you have Joseph Ledger and the crystal make a deal, bam, he wakes up. And when he wakes up, as we saw in our last video, he flies away. And that's it. That is how the world got Dr. Spectrum. And this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.